Hello, my name is Charles Balcom, and today we're going to be talking about the Essential Air Service. So just a little bit of background. Before 1978, airlines were able to fly unprofitable routes to small communities. This was because the government subsidized the flights, and these unprofitable routes didn't necessarily have to go to small communities. They could just be unprofitable, and the government would cover the losses. However, this changed after airline deregulation in 1978 because with deregulation, the government no longer subsidized these flights. So most airlines were planning to cut unprofitable flights to stay profitable. This mainly affected smaller communities because smaller communities that were kind of isolated were the ones that had the most unprofitable routes. So deregulating kind of left these communities at risk of being cut off from the air service network. So this is where the Essential Air Service, or EAS program, comes in. To ensure these smaller communities did not lose commercial service, the government created the EAS program, which allowed the government to continue subsidizing these routes to smaller, more isolated communities. As of September 2020, there were 108 communities in the lower 48 in Hawaii, and then 60 in Alaska. Alaska is the most EAS communities, just by the nature of the state and that it's very big and the population is very spread out. And then each EAS community has a contract with different requirements for capacity, frequency, aircraft, etc. So there are certain criteria you have to meet to be eligible for the Essential Air Service. The big two are that you must have had commercial air service before airline deregulation occurred on October 24th, 1978, and you cannot be located within 70 miles of a medium or large hub airport with commercial service. Fun fact, Purdue University Airport is actually located 69.6 miles away from the nearest medium hub airport, which is Indianapolis, so we are not eligible for EAS service. Some more criteria, each community airport must maintain greater than 10 enplanements per service day. There are some exceptions to this, such as in Alaska or Hawaii, this doesn't need to be met. Or if your traffic is highly seasonal, as in you get a lot of people during one season and much less during another season. Another criteria is unless the community is greater than 210 miles away from the nearest large or medium hub airport, the government cannot give greater than $200 per enplaned passenger on that route. Another one being the community must have a subsidy of less than $1,000 per enplaned passenger in the first year in the EAS program in order to maintain eligibility. And the final criteria, if they are within 40 miles of a small hub airport, then local cost sharing between the government and local community must be negotiated. Now we talked about airline or airports. How are air carriers selected to serve EAS routes? The applicant, which is the air carrier, must have a demonstrated reliability in providing scheduled air service outside of this route. The applicant must have made contractual agreements with another large carrier to ensure connectivity beyond the hub airport. This is mainly in the case that the applicant is a specialized EAS carrier or they're a regional carrier, just to make sure that the passengers going from that small town to the large hub can travel beyond the large hub and just not to the large hub. The third one kind of goes in hand with the second one. The applicant needs to have made sure that they have interline agreements with larger carriers to allow passengers and cargo of the applicant air carrier at the hub airport to be transported by larger carriers through one reservation. This basically ensures that a passenger traveling from the EAS community to the hub can travel from the hub to another city on the same ticket. And then also the preferences for the potential users of the air transportation at the eligible network will also be taken into account, as well as the elected representatives. So say, for example, Lafayette, say we were to be eligible for EAS service, the preferences of the local community would probably have the EAS service go to Chicago, and then they would also take into account the local congressmen and senators' opinions as well. And then finally, whether or not the applicant or air carrier has included a plan in its proposal to market its service to the community. This is pretty big for communities that have not had air service before. You want to make sure you get the news out that there will be air service coming to the community so that people will fly the route and don't have to keep driving very far distances. So then here we have some examples of EAS communities in Alabama, Arkansas, and Arizona. So the first important part of this is the air carrier As you can see, the air carrier can be some of these specialized EAS carriers, a regional carrier such as SkyWest, and it's not shown here, but sometimes legacy carriers can even fly this as well. So there's that. And then if you look to the column to the left, you will also see how much the government is paying these carriers per year to fly these routes. Next important thing is this contract start and end date. The contracts last 2 years. Next is the current hubs served. You will see that most of these routes serve 1 to 2 hubs. Some of them serve the major hubs like Atlanta and DFW. This is common with legacy and regional carriers. And then some of these smaller EAS carriers will fly to smaller airports where they can still make connections in places like Memphis and St. Louis. Next, the number of seats. Here you'll see that some of these aircraft only have 8 or 9 seats. This is, again, typical amongst those smaller EAS carriers because they have turboprops running these routes like Cessna Caravans or PC-12s. But then you also have like ERJ-135, CRJ-200 aircraft. These are jet aircraft, and odds are they're being flown. These ones are being flown by legacy or regional carriers. You can see the CRJ-200 is being flown by SkyWest, which is operated by SkyWest, but the plane is from United. And then one more important thing that I wanted to point out, actually 2 more important things. The regulations right here, if you go to regulations.gov and copy paste these docket numbers into the website, the EAS contracts for all these for the community that you copy pasted will come up, and it's pretty interesting to see the terms and conditions. And then obviously an important part of those terms and conditions is the number of flights per day. These vary depending on community. Most of them have over 2, and as you can see here, a lot of them have 3 to 4 round trips a day to the hub. This can obviously vary on a lot of things, such as the size of the aircraft and the expected demand in the community. You can see that the smaller aircraft tend to have more round trips per day, 3 to 4, than the larger aircraft, which tend to have 2 round trips per day. So a case study that we're going to do is for Garden City, Kansas. Garden City, Kansas is a small town in western Kansas with a population of about 20,000. So without the EAS, they would probably not have commercial air service. The thing with Garden City is that it is located 316 miles away from the largest, or from the nearest large or medium hub airport. That would be Denver, Colorado. So since they are 316 miles away and 316 is greater than 210, they are eligible for greater than $200 in subsidies per in-plane passenger. Now for the contract at Garden City, this was picked up by American in 2018 and was renewed in 2020. And they were the only bidder, so they got the contract fairly easily. And since this new contract was $100,000, or the new contract in 2020 was actually $100,000 less for the US government than the old contract in 2018. And we'll see that on the next slide. So this is what happens when you plug in that docket number into regulations.gov. You'll get the whole contract. And this is a pretty good summary of what's on the contract. So this is the contract between August 1st, 2020 and July 31st, 2022. This is American Airlines providing essential air service to Garden City, obviously. The annual subsidy that the government is paying American Airlines to fly this route is $772,000. The hub that American is serving from Garden City is Dallas-Fort Worth, which, as most of you know, is the main hub for American Airlines. This kind of fits that criteria for the air carriers earlier, as it was stated that you want to make sure that the customers flying from the small community have the ability to connect further from the hub. So obviously DFW, you can fly to a ton of places on American. So that's a good way to get passengers from Garden City, not only to Dallas, but to essentially anywhere in the United States. The scheduled frequency is 14 nonstops per week. So that's 2 per day, or 14 round trips per week. That's about 2 round trips per day. And that makes sense because it's a 44-seat ERJ 140. So those tend to be on the larger side of EAS aircraft. So that makes sense why there's only 2 nonstops per day, or 2 nonstop round trips a day. So kind of moving on from EAS, this isn't directly related to EAS, but it tends to affect a lot of airports that are EAS carriers, or that have EAS carriers. So economically distressed areas, tend to be in areas, like I said before, where EAS carriers serve. These are typically areas that are at risk economically, just due to the nature of where they are, probably isolated from nearby cities. So being an EDA, or an economically distressed area, allows you to receive more federal funding from the Airport Improvement Plan than non-EDA airports. So up to 95% of your airport improvement plans can be funded through the government, or your number of projects through the Airport Improvement Plan can be funded by the government. This differs from non-EDA areas, as those areas can only have up to 90% of their airport projects funded through the AIP. And then some criteria for becoming an EDA: you must have a per capita income level less than 80% of the national average. Your unemployment rate must be 1% below the national average for the last 2 years. And the area has a need arising from potential severe unemployment or similar adjustments. So when they say potential severe unemployment, that could be like a large employer leaving the area and like a lot of the community going unemployed. This can also come in other forms, such as an economic slowdown, where you have more people losing jobs in the area. And that's about it for the presentation. There's 4 questions here. Now, there's no gotcha answers. That we should have gone over all these in the presentation. And then some important links here. This is the table I was showing you guys earlier. This is for the lower 48, Hawaii and Puerto Rico. And if you copy paste this, you'll be able to see all of the EAS routes as of September 2020, I believe. And it'll show you like how much the government is paying each carrier to fly the routes, where they're flying to, how often they're flying, what carriers are flying them, etc. And then the second link is essentially the same thing, but for communities in Alaska. And this third link is the EAS contract for Garden City, which is the one we went over. And then finally, here's some references. Most of them are from the US government concerning essential air service policy, or economically distressed areas policies. So yeah, that is it for this presentation. Thank you very much for listening in.